Hi, my name is Javier Albornoz, and today we'll be talking about mixing in Pro Tools. Mixing refers to balancing levels between individual tracks. This can include dialogue, sound effects, and music tracks, but mixing also refers to a mix of the stems that build up a single two-mix or stereo music file, and it can include the use of insert effects, send effects, and buses. I have a Pro Tools session open for a student project called What's the Buzz? So we'll take a look at a short section of the project so we can break down the individual layers and the parts that make up this mix of the specific section of this short. So as you can see here in my Pro Tools session, I'm looking at my edit window only, but I can click to view, if I wanted to, my mix window. So let's go back to edit. Remember that you can do that here from the menu, choose mix or edit, and there's a check mark on the one that you're actively viewing. So normally, I would have them both open and maybe have it sort of like half and half on the screen. But for now, because we're going to focus a lot on the edit window and would like to view more, I'll leave only the edit window visible. So some of the things we've seen in other tutorials, you have your track list here. Now, there are many more tracks listed here than I actually have visible, because remember, you can choose the visibility. For example, there I enabled visibility of that track called Ghost, and now disabling it because I'm actually not going to be interested in working with that track for this demo. So you can see in the track list, there are many, many more tracks that I have disabled right now that I can choose to view. Now, don't forget that if there is audio playing back from these, disabling them only affects what you're seeing, but not what you're hearing. They will still play back if there is audio information on those tracks. So that's very important to keep in mind. Here I have my groups, and you can see I have a great deal of groups. This is, of course, great for working with a large session where you have a lot of different individual audio elements. Up here on the top right, you can see this is my video window. And right now it's selected, it's at the top of my edit window. And you can see here that it is showing you some frames so you can kind of get a preview of where you're at. But if this for some reason might be slowing your system down, you can actually click here and change this to blocks. So you get one solid block and you don't have your computer trying to render out those frames, and it could help out. The other thing that would help out if you're having any trouble with that is choosing here under draft or full quality or best performance. These are going to definitely affect the playback. So right now it's in draft, so it is degrading the quality of the visuals slightly, but since we are really just interested in the audio, we're usually better off going with draft or best performance, especially when you're working with a really large video file. This button that you see here on the video track is going to enable or disable your video. So we do want it enabled right now. And you can see here to the left, we have 24 frames per second, which if our session was not matching the video, this would show up in red, letting you know that there was a problem. And then we could go to setup, session, and make sure that our time code rate matches and we are at the correct rate of this video. Great. So let's play back a few seconds of this. I'm going to actually bring down the master a bit for the purpose of the screen capture level. And let's play some back here and show you what we're working with everything we are currently viewing unmuted.
Welcome to another episode of What's the Buzz?
Hi, I'm the Book Bee. I'm a little bee, and I read books. It's kind of my thing, you know? So today I have with me one of the greatest Spanish authors, Miguel de Cervantes.
Thank you for having me, Book Bee. So, what do you want to know?
Great. So that's about 20 seconds of the short character being introduced, sort of a talk show format. You hear the audience cheering. There was some sound effects of the curtain and the sign descending and ascending. And of course, the dialogue of the characters and music. So let's dissect what we have here. At the top, below our video track, we do have the lines of dialogue. Now, these have already been through their own processing dynamics and frequency, so EQ and compression and de-essing and that kind of thing. So right now, they are just living, ready to be mixed in with everything else. So what we are adding to these, though, that were not added during the dialogue editing phase were things like reverb. So those are living on the tracks as send effects. So you can see here, this one actually does have some further EQ and compression and de-essing, but this specific track, the announcer track, is going to two different reverbs as sends. And you can see here, they are both in pre-fader mode, and they are being sent to those specific reverb plugins, which in this case we can pop up and view the reverb if we were interested in changing them. Now you notice here how I am selecting this one clip, but it is appearing as being selected in this entire group. And the reason for that is because I do have a group created here for dialogue. If I unselect that group, now I can individually select that track. So let's hear this specific announcer track without music and sound effects and everything else. And we can hear how that reverb is on it, giving it that PA sound.
Welcome to another episode of What's the Buzz?
So of course, if I were to bypass those sends and take a listen.
Welcome to another episode of What's the Buzz?
So there we have it as the dry dialogue without our reverb. But of course, we do want that reverb. So we are adding that now in the mix phase rather than dialogue editing. So let's mute our dialogue. I'll reselect the group so we can mute all at once. So this is a mix and edit group at this time. If I go to modify our group, you can see here it is selected to be a mix and edit group, and these are all the tracks that are in that group. So let's go here to our sound effects, and it's not a lot happening. It's simply just the sound of the sign descending, ascending, and the curtain. So let's take a listen. Great. So these, similar to the dialogue, have already gone through some processing. So right now they're just sort of in the mix phase with, of course, some editing here to match. You've got some crossfades to extend that sound of the crank and the sound of the drapes here for the curtains. So you can see here, I'm going to unselect the group here so we can just listen to the curtain. I'll select them all and play. So there was some crossfading of this. It's a sound effect of drapes here. You can see that the original file name is there from the sound effects library, but I have named the track curtain, and you'll see that all my other tracks are named according to their role, and it's pretty important and helpful to do that. You can see here applause. Now it is abbreviated so that it fits, but Pro Tools will show you the full track name, show start, APP for applause, middle, front. So pretty specific so that you can really keep track, because as you can see for this applause, we'll take a look at that next. there's a lot going on to create the applause layer, so it's easy to sort of get lost in your own sound effects that you're building up. So let's go back here to the start of the cheering and we'll focus on that. So you can see that this first set of applause here is made up by these 4 different tracks. So the mixing there, let's select them and take a look now at our mix window. So those 4 tracks, they of course are set at whatever level was appropriate for them. But also you can see here that using the volume envelope or maybe keyframes, there was still some manipulation. You can see that this was cut and muted there. There is some manipulation in the volume envelope. Here's a quick crossfade. There's fade outs and fade ins at the beginning of most tracks. And you can see that each applause is made up of the front and rear. So the specific crowd sound was recorded with 2 front mics, 2 rear mics. So it's helpful to create this, the sound of the space. And great for that realism. But there is a balance that you can play around with so that you get, more of front, less of rear, or vice versa, whatever's necessary. So let's hear some of that.
Yes.
And there's some of the laughing here. You can see that again, we are kind of very quickly crossfading from the ones that worked best together during the sound editing phase, that was determined that this was the best route to go for what was needed to match the picture. You can see there's heavy volume envelope work here because we are going from this sort of louder, more raucous applause down to a little bit less and tapering off. So one sound effect recording of the crowd sound really doesn't cut it, and you do have to tailor it so that it really works. Let's check that out. So you really end up wanting to bring it down when the dialogue starts. Let's hear the dialogue with it so you can see the results of that.
Hi, I'm the book bee. I'm a little bee, and I read books. It's good.
Great. So of course, we haven't in all of this attended to music. And if we scroll down, you'll see that our music stems were delivered for this section as 7 different audio stems. You've got tenor sax, alto sax, trombone. You've got a group of horns, guitar, bass, drums. And below that, this is important, you'll see that there is a bus where if you check out the routing on all the music tracks, they are being sent to a bus that I labeled band bus. So this is the house band. It gets all routed into this bus, and you do see that there is some EQ as well as some automation here that is tailored to, again, match the band, compensating for the dialogue. Of course, dialogue is king and needs to be heard. So definitely there is a lot of manipulation there. But even before that, there is some attention to volume envelope for specific sections and specific instruments. Bass here came down a bit, crossfades just to join it back up when volume goes back up. So there's some very detailed changes in volume there that need to be attended to. So let's hear our music track. We'll mute dialogue, group, and everything else. And let's go back to where the band starts playing. So you can see here how the band bus automation, you probably heard those results there in how the music decreased in level and increased slightly towards the end once the character Cervantes is announced again. So let's hear it all together again so you get an idea of how that blends together with dialogue, sound effects, and applause.
Welcome to another episode of What's the Buzz?
Hi, I'm the Book Bee. I'm a little bee, and I read books. It's kind of my thing, you know? So today I have with me one of the greatest Spanish authors, Miguel de Cervantes.
Thank you for having me, Book Bee. So, what do you want to know?
Well, Mr. Cervantes, how do you feel?
So now let's go back and check out this same section of the short, but we'll focus on our mix window so you can see what's going on in that view. So we'll go to Window, click Mix, and now we see our track faders. Now over here, the selected track, we also have our band bus. Now more buses will eventually be created to encompass these sound effects. But for now, the band bus is the only one, this music bus. Actually, we do have a dialogue bus, but not yet sound effects and applause buses, although they are grouped, as we saw here, so that they can be edited, manipulated, and mixed using groups. So let's go back so we can see sort of an overview. You've got your dialogue here on the left. These are your sound effects. And here's the applause along with the music stems here leading to the buses and master. And you can see how they've all been color coded so they're easy to differentiate when you're looking at your mixer here. So we'll play and see things happening.
Welcome to another episode of What's the Buzz?
Hi, I'm the Book Bee. I'm a little bee, and I read books. It's kind of my thing, you know? So today I have with me one of the greatest Spanish authors, Miguel de Cervantes.
Thank you for having me, Book Bee. So, what do you want to know?
Well, Mr. Cervantes,
Great. So you can see how, of course, in our dialogue, you've got the main character along with announcer and Cervantes and their level jumping, but you saw this sort of cascading of all the applause stuff. And you can see a little bit of the music stems on the right, but we've got various faders here, so we couldn't see everything. Let's go back and we'll take a look at the band bus, and you can see the automation that's happening there as it plays back.
Welcome to another episode of What's the Buzz?
hi, I'm the Book Bee. I'm a little bee, and I read books. It's kind of my thing, you know? So today I have with me one of the greatest Spanish authors, Miguel de Cervantes.
Thank you for having me, Book Bee. So, what do you want to know?
Well,
Great.
Mr. Cervantes,
So
how
you
do you
can
feel
see-
about pioneering the concept of a novel?
With Don Quixote, it was easy.
You could see how that was reflected. The automation was making this fader move with the same envelope that we have here drawn out in our band bus volume envelope. Now, as far as other automation, right now, that's the only actual automation that's happening, but you do have lots of volume envelope changes, not usually referred to as automation, but it's essentially doing the same thing, sort of keyframes, you can call it, but in this case, they're happening to individual clips as opposed to the track automation. So let's go back and take a look again at our mix window. I wanted to show you we were having this issue where we really can't fit all of our faders on the screen. But don't forget that under view, you can click narrow mix, and you're going to get this very narrow, scrunched up view of your faders. It does make it a bit harder and almost impossible to really make out the track names. You can mouse over them and they will pop up eventually, but this is where color coding can be very helpful for viewing them as larger groups. Of course, it's harder to differentiate each individual applause, for example, here without seeing the full name or seeing them in the edit window, but it is helpful. And this way, if play.
Hi, I'm the Book Bee. I'm a little bee, and I read books. It's kind of my thing, you know? So today I have with me...
There you're able to see the entire mix window and all the faders, all the levels on the faders moving at once. So that's a introduction into sort of how to set up your mix in Pro Tools. One of the many ways. Remember that this is something that you need to develop your own workflow, and it's really dependent on project to project, what the needs of the specific project are and how you will tackle the audio for that project.